Hello and welcome to StrandExplains, a podcast where we discuss what's happening in the world of precision medicine, from compelling case studies and interesting facts to interviews with leaders in the industry. I'm Sakshi Shingle, and today I'm joined by RK to discuss World Diabetes Day.
537 million people live with diabetes in the world.
And 7.3% of the Indian population has diabetes, not to mention 10.3% has prediabetes.
And 14th November, that is Sunday, is World Diabetes Day. And so we thought we'd make this short podcast episode on diabetes. What are some notable things about this year, Sakshi, that stand out for diabetes?
So, first of all, this year is Insulin 100. It's been 100 years since insulin was discovered. We actually celebrate on 14th November because it's the birthday of Sir Frederick Banting, who was one of the main discoverers, or who was the person who came up with the idea for insulin. And then along with J.J.R. Mack, who was a professor he worked with, and Charles H. Best, together the three of them actually discovered insulin. I have a slightly personal connection to this because insulin was really discovered at my alma mater at U of T, University of Toronto. And so, I've been weirdly enough hearing about this for the last 2 or 3 years. I've been getting emails. I remember last year there were things happening on campus, just getting geared up. So it is a really exciting year because 100 years since discovery, as well as 100 years since the first patient was actually injected with insulin to see what would happen.
Do you know if your alma mater is doing anything in commemoration of this year?
So I think they're having like a small ceremony, if I'm not mistaken. Like alumni have been like invited to join a Zoom call, which I might also just be asleep because it'll be 4 a.m. for me.
Maybe 4 a.m.
I might not join, but I do know they're doing something along those lines. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's something on campus. I used to study in the Banting building and the MacLeod building a lot. And I remember I'd be like studying some anatomy or physiology and like dazing out and looking up and seeing posters of Banting and like the place, my study spot, funnily enough, like my favorite study spot was under posters of Banting. And so, there's definitely that connection for me. So it is pretty exciting. But I think that's what they're going to do, just something smaller on campus and a Zoom for all alumni to join into. But yeah, it's an exciting year for sure.
And this is important because 100 years ago, diabetes was essentially a death sentence, right?
Yeah, it really was, especially for people who had type 1 diabetes. And we'll go into the differences of what type 1 and type 2 are in a second. But type 1 diabetes is typically seen in early childhood, like even when you're 1 or 2 years old. And like you said, it was a death sentence. And the first child to be who did get a dose of insulin back 100 years ago wrote a note to Banting. And it's just so sweet. And they have a copy of it. So I'll just read it out. And it goes along the lines of, "Dear Dr. Banting, I wish you could come to see me. I am a fat boy now and I feel fine. I can climb a tree. Lots of love from Teddy Ryder." And so I think that's just so sweet. And we keep going back to that human point and what is the human story in all of this. And I think this is just such a great depiction of the humanity involved in these things, especially in this case of insulin, where this was a 6-year-old boy who was able to live his life and climb a tree. And it's just so heartwarming, really. And these really human stories always, I think, are really important. And like we mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, 537 million people live with diabetes. Maybe let's go into what the different types of those diabetes are and how they work.
Yeah, so type 1 diabetes is the inability to produce insulin. Essentially, what happens is that there are these autoimmune antibodies, basically our own immune system attacking the insulin that the body produces, and that's type 1. And type 2 is people produce insulin, but they do not respond to it. They grow increasingly resistant to insulin. And so type 1, there are some genetic elements to both type 1 and type 2, but it's an extremely complex disease in general. Type 1, you can do a test that's like an antibody test when people develop symptoms. So for instance, one of the common symptoms of type 1 diabetes, which is typically seen in people before 40 years old, is that they lose a lot of weight very quickly, and that's when the onset has occurred. sometimes the onset does not occur for a long time. Sometimes it never occurs. You might still be having all these antibodies, but they don't do anything.
I see.
But once the onset does occur, the test is like an antibody test. But with type 2, we all know about, of course, there's the blood sugar test, which is common to both. And additionally, nowadays you have the HbA1c test. And type 2 is, unlike type 1, type 2 is seen typically much later in life, and is definitely influenced by lifestyle choices, both positively as well as negatively. So people who do have type 2 can have, there is a cure that basically consists of eating healthier and less sugary foods, and that can really have a huge influence on, symptoms.
I think all of us know either someone very close to us, or we all have family members who have some form of diabetes. I have grandparents on both sides who have diabetes. And I think you were saying something similar, that you have family members who you're close to.
Yeah, and some people would say these days that while 100 years ago it was a killer, even today living with it is not easy. You have, especially type 1 diabetes, I know is, it comes on early, so you live with it for a much longer time, and the effect of sugar on the body over an increased period of time leads to all kinds of medical conditions, right? People have heard of things like retinopathies, right? So your eyes sort of marinate in the sugar, the increased sugar, over a long period of time, and that leads to essentially them failing sooner. Just poor eyesight as an example, but there's all kinds of other complaints that lead to a generally decreased quality of life. And the same goes for type 2, except it starts much later. So my dad, for instance, has sort of in the ballpark of type 2. Is sometimes he doesn't have it, sometimes the sugar's sky high, he needs to take care. But yeah, I think a lot of us know people who have diabetes, of either kind.
And I think the other thing that also comes to play is diabetes is one of those diseases that can lead to other complications. So, for instance, my grandmother, rest her soul, who passed away last year, she had diabetes, and while it didn't lead to it, it definitely exacerbated her kidney failure. And when I think she was on dialysis, a lot of the complications that arose in her treatments were just because she was also a diabetes patient. She was also a heart patient. And a lot of these things started becoming interrelated, where one thing led to the other, which led to the other. It is a difficult disease to live with, and can really make things a lot harder. But thankfully, we have things like insulin, which can help us out. And as annoying as it is to hear, eating right, being healthy, all of those things can really make a difference, especially in the long term, like you're saying, where maybe this week, this year, this month, you're not going to see a difference. But after 5, 10 years, it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing, and I just want to conclude here, is that the discovery of insulin again was groundbreaking, in that the reverse is also true from what you said, is that one of my relatives has type 1 diabetes, and she lives an essentially normal life. She eats ice cream just like everybody else.
Oh,
She loves Bengali sweets, and so she eats them all the time. And the only thing she has that's different from everybody else is an insulin pump, right? And this was inconceivable 100 years ago. So we've come a long way. Of course, we have a long way to go, and there will be all of these other comorbidities or attendant conditions over a period of time. But hopefully, we're working towards solving that.
yeah. So thanks for taking the time to talk to me, RK. I know we tend to focus more on precision medicine and cancer topic,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting change to talk about something else. Yeah, have a good day. Thank you.
Take care.